Welcome to the fourth webinar in our ongoing series of sessions on integrating the Common Core state standards for the education of English language learner and emergent bilingual students in secondary settings. Today we will meet again for 1 hour and end promptly at 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. We are pleased today to be joined by Dr. Jim Middleton, Professor of Engineering, Education, and Director of the Center for Research on Education and Science, Mathematics, Engineering, and Technology at Arizona State University. Dr. Middleton's research interests focus on children's mathematical thinking, teacher and student motivation in mathematics, and teacher change in mathematics. He's currently engaged in a project investigating the sustainability of changes in urban elementary teachers' mathematics practices. All of his work has been conducted in collaborative partnerships with diverse, economically challenged urban schools. This relationship has resulted in a significant positive impact on the direction that partner districts have taken, including a significant increase in mathematics achievement in the face of rising poverty rate. Before Dr. Middleton presents, we'll spend just a few minutes reminding our participants about the key activities, opportunities, and resources available via Education Connections for those who are not already members or for those of you who have recently joined. As some of you may recall from last month's session, each of these webinars will begin with an introduction and overview by members of the Education Connections staff, followed by a presentation by a guest presenter. During today's brief introduction, we'll remind participants of the key activities associated with the Education Connections project. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Jim Middleton, who will share thoughts about motivating students in the context of Common Core aligned instruction in the area of mathematics. Following Dr. Middleton's presentation, we'll have a few moments reserved for questions and comments from participants. We welcome you to submit questions throughout the course of the session, and Dr. Middleton will respond to them during his presentation. We strongly encourage you, therefore, to send along any thoughts or questions that come to mind during the presentation. At the end of the short Q&A session, at the end of the presentation, we'll briefly highlight our monthly lesson plan competition, which is currently underway for the month of August. We also invite you to join Education Connections via the link on your screen to access additional resources after today's session and to enter this month's lesson planning competition. Remember that winners have the opportunity to receive $100. So just a brief overview of Education Connections. For those of you who may be new to the site and the community, we wanted to briefly introduce to you what we're doing and the various activities associated with Education Connections. We are an online community of teachers working together to implement standards-based instruction for English learner or emergent bilingual students. This is an initiative of the Center for Applied Linguistics, and it is hosted within the University of Oregon's OVAverse Learning Management platform. Education Connections provides professional learning communities, resources, webinars, and lesson planning tools, as well as a monthly lesson planning competition. The professional learning communities consist of groups of teachers working in similar content areas, asking each other questions and sharing resources. There are discussion forums for these groups, as well as a general discussion forum for all members. We collect and post a variety of practical, teacher-oriented resources, adding new resources to the collections on a weekly basis. These include items such as blog posts, videos of teachers demonstrating Common Core aligned lessons, lesson plans, as well as activities for your classroom. Webinars, such as today's event, are conducted every 2 months roughly and are archived within the site for viewing at any time. We have developed expressly for Education Connections a lesson plan template that targets Common Core aligned instruction that also is relevant for English learner or emergent bilingual students. And we encourage teachers to use the lesson plan template that we've developed, which again incorporates space for both Common Core state standards or state-based standards as well as English language proficiency standards, and highlights various strategies for sheltering that we would encourage teachers to employ to meet the needs of English learner or emergent bilingual students. As part of our lesson planning activities, we also offer, again, a monthly lesson plan competition, and we would encourage you to submit lesson plans for our August competition. And again, winners receive $100. So we'll pass along now the torch to Dr. Middleton, and we thank him for his time and his willingness to share his expertise. Again, We encourage you to submit questions during his presentation. Thanks again so much for joining us, everyone.
We're just right now getting trying to get the slides put up. There we go. Now, thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to work with the Center for Applied Linguistics to present some ideas that may be helpful for teachers or curriculum developers who are struggling with Common Core implementation, in particular how it deals with language minorities and with the great diversity of students in the United States right now. I wish I could see your faces. It's always helpful to see other people's faces when you're talking. But I'll assume you're all smiling, at least at this point in time. This is one of my favorite research topics. It's the one I've been engaged in for about 30 years now. And it's becoming more and more important as we try to implement more challenging and more rigorous mathematical content nationally. I would like to reiterate the fact that I would appreciate questions as we go along. I have slides, but this presentation is not about just putting slides up and me talking. If you have questions, if you have concerns, if you have ideas, please post them so that we can deal with those directly and provide some assistance and perhaps a little more joy to the operation today. Now, this is taken directly from the Common Core State Standards. It's kind of the reason for them being developed. And the idea that I want to foster here is that the Common Core State Standards are high-quality mathematics. They're well constructed in terms of their overall structure. Yes, there were some decisions that had to be made about overall organization and what topics to keep, what topics to subsume under larger topics, but it's very good mathematics. But there are some things that are going to make it difficult in the implementation. The first is that it's more challenging than the typical U.S. curriculum. And second, that challenge is being presented to a increasingly diverse population of students, diverse in terms of language, of course, diverse in terms of culture and the ways in which mathematics is seen as an important or necessary part of their local communities, and diverse in terms of students' interests and predilections. This is a really exciting time to be in education, and we need to take this challenge head on. And lastly, Common Core has a difficulty in implementation because it will be a moving target. As we start to understand our levels of successes and failures, then these standards, of course, should be changed, should be updated so that we can account for new mathematics, new applications, what we know about student learning and performance under different conditions. But I don't want you to panic. I'm a big fan of Douglas Adams, and like Douglas Adams, I'm going to reduce all the complexities of the universe into a trilogy. And this is where I'm going to apologize right away. Okay, I better stop that right now. I need to apologize for my 70s rock fetish, but I was given Give Me Three Steps by Leonard Skinner, and so I'm going to reduce this down into a trilogy, just like Douglas Adams. And of course, just like Douglas Adams, the trilogy quickly morphed into a four-part series. But I'll leave it at this four. The four important ideas that I want to touch upon today are the idea that students have these needs for belonging. And we need to develop in them competence in mathematical subject matter. And as we do that, they also need an appropriate level of autonomy to be able to chart their way through the world. And they need to develop a mindset that gives them efficacy on the world so that they know that these competencies that they're developing are important and that they can be applied to the future goals that they may have for themselves. We're going to go through each facet of mathematics motivation, highlighting implications for instructions in each. And again, please ask questions as we go along, and we'll try to cover those as you ask them. Now, of course, this 4-step process, or three steps plus one, is very simple on the surface. And we all know as teachers and as curriculum developers that in real classrooms it's a bit muddier. It requires the strategic and artistic skills of a teacher to pull it all off. So I don't want to, I'm not trying to underestimate the challenge that's required here in terms of changing the motivational patterns of large swaths of our population. So the first thing we need to think about is belonging. Human beings are genetically programmed to live and work in a community. And each person has a role to play in their community, whether that community is their family or the classroom community. And we'll focus more on the classroom community here than the other communities in which students are embedded. You know, everyone needs someone who they believe cares for them as an individual. That would be perhaps the teacher, but it could also be teachers' aides, it can also be administrators, but primarily the teacher. And everyone needs to know that they are capable and contributing members of this community, that their relationships with other students are mutual, and that they give quality help and assistance and support to students, and they receive it from their compatriots. And everyone has to have competent support to negotiate the bureaucracy of the institution, meaning secretaries as their first line of defense to even communicate with the school, and of course administrators up and down the line. And I coined this term, relationships build reform. The most important thing we can do in our schools is to develop relationships between teachers, kids, and administrators that students trust are in their best interest, and that students will exploit to develop deeper and more effective mathematical goals for themselves. And this comes from a large body of research on human beings as social animals. All of these things that I have bolded here, need for social affiliation, shared meaning, etc., are critical needs that students have. And we need to understand that all students all the time are trying to negotiate with these social needs at the same time as they're trying to deal with learning academically. And when we get to English learners, the need for social affiliation, shared meaning, demonstrating competence, those three are highly implicated in learning a second language when you're embedded in a community of native speakers of the first language. And of course, avoidance and fear of disapproval are major demotivators from students to actually contribute significantly to a linguistic community that tends to support English only, as opposed to nurturing students either bilingualism or development of a second academic language. And so this last bullet, students can develop autonomy fruitfully only when some kind of positive interdependence exists, is the point I'd like for you to take away. That there needs to be interdependence among students, teachers, and administrators in the school, and particularly in the classroom, so that there is a safe environment for language learners to be able to make mistakes linguistically and be corrected appropriately, to be able to communicate important mathematical ideas in a variety of representations and using a variety of tools, so that words are not the only way in which ideas can be expressed. So the idea then comes to, once we've developed a safe environment, how do we increase students' competence? Because that's really what the Common Core State Standards for Mathematics is about. It's about developing students' mathematical competence. And so these are the Common Core standards for mathematics that are the standards for mathematical practice that we want to develop. I didn't put all of the specific standards, but these are the things that we want students to do all the time in their mathematical study. And if you look at them, they're quite different than we've emphasized in the past. they're, I think, more difficult to understand and more difficult to try to pull off. But you need to think about them as contributing to each other. That perseverance is a function of students' mathematical motivation. That reasoning abstractly and quantitatively is what mathematics is about. Constructing and evaluating mathematical arguments are the ways in which we speak to each other. That modeling with mathematics is how we interface mathematical ideas, the abstractions, from the real world, and how we then bring the real world into mathematics to see that mathematics is an important tool. Using appropriate software and other kinds of tools, manipulatives, even metaphors as linguistics tools are critical for helping students engage in this, et cetera, et cetera. These are really important, and we want to emphasize these continually throughout mathematics class, not just as either separate topics or as things that come at the end of the chapter. Now, competence is critical because if students feel they're more competent, they tend to have these valuable outcomes, be more persistent, less math anxious. They actually are able to think deeper when they feel they're competent, in part because they're less anxious and their mind is not taken up with how to escape mathematics. And because of all these things, they tend to achieve better. And then to help them become competent, we need to worry about the kind of feedback we provide them. And feedback has two kinds of value for the students. An informational value, which means that you can say, the idea is that not only should you tell a student that they're correct or incorrect, but they should understand from the feedback how to correct their conception, how to correct their skill, so that the feedback is not that you're wrong, but that's not quite there yet. Here's how we need to be thinking, or I want you to try this new exercise to get you to think in a more robust or a more mathematically sophisticated manner. In this way, feedback is very much like very much like coaching. In addition, feedback has a reward value. Whether or not we like it, and when we tell students they're wrong, it is conceived of as a kind of punishment. And when we tell students they are correct, it's seen as a kind of reward. And so the typical kinds of negative consequences of both rewards and punishments come out when we utilize feedback as just correct or incorrect. And so one of the most important techniques in ELL classrooms that I've seen is for teachers to give neutral feedback for correctness, but positive feedback for revealing a student revealing their thinking. So if a student is able to tell you what their strategy is able to reveal their thought processes, then that gives you good information as a teacher on how to correct it or how to exploit it for the rest of the class. And then you can use the reward value of feedback by saying, I see exactly how you're thinking them. So that's wonderful. And to give that same kind of feedback for clear incorrect thinking as you do for clear correct thinking. And then let the actual correctness of the mathematics be something that's related to the Common Core standard, related to constructing and evaluating mathematical arguments and attending to precision. Okay. So also in this attending in competence, we're increasing the challenge of the mathematics. And so how does challenge interrelate with students' intrinsic motivation? Now, do we have any questions yet? I don't see any yet. I just want to make sure. I don't see any. Okay, we'll keep going. So intrinsic motivation is an idea that was developed by motivation researchers to describe those kinds of activities where we engage in them not for a reward or not to escape a punishment, but just for their own sake, because we like them. And the kinds of things, and it's important to understand that challenge is a necessary component of any kind of task that fosters intrinsic motivation. It has to be challenging. It has to be worthwhile. It has to be difficult enough to where you would engage in some sort of deep mental processing for it. Intrinsic motivation also hinges upon students' interests, their personal interests, who they think they are, where do they want to go in their life, what kind of activities do they like, what sorts of topics do they read on their own, what sorts of activities do they engage in after school, and incorporating those interests are critical for developing interest in a mathematical task, which may or may not be, the mathematics content itself may not be tied to a particular topic, and so this is why real-world context becomes so critically important, is to tap into students' interests at the same time as maintaining the important level of challenge. Also, another drab discovery of the obvious by education researchers is that the more useful mathematics appears, the more students will show interest in it and the more effort they will apply in learning it. The key thing that makes it not so trivial is this question here: for whom? Useful for whom? Is it useful for me, or is it useful for some scientist way off in the future? And so there's a trade-off here in helping students understand that mathematics may have an immediate utility for you to understand the world, and also a delayed utility in helping you become who you want to be: a scientist, become an actuary, to become a business person, to become a police officer, a firefighter, or a plumber. All of those require important and deep mathematics to accomplish. And of course then those tie to your present and future goals. Now we've got a question. The first question we have here is, how can we help teachers identify the language practices associated with the mathematical practices of the Common Core state standards? All right, now I'm going to go back to the standards for mathematical practice. Now language, there's a number of different language practices that I think are very useful. One that I described earlier is how do we reward students' thinking. The only way you can reward students' thinking and the clarity of thinking when they reason abstractly and quantitatively is to get them to reveal it, to actively choose a subset of student strategies for students to then speak publicly and to show their work and to discuss the reasoning behind that work and make that reasoning public. In an inner-city classroom that I worked in, I think all but 2 of the children were immigrant children from Mexico or Central America, and the predominant language, of course, was Spanish in that context. The teachers did some really remarkable things. They would specifically choose only 2 or maybe 3 strategies, because you can't take up all day with students revealing their strategies. They have to actually develop the strategies. They would choose 2 or 3 strategies that they saw students working on in their small groups, and they would ask a person to be the spokesperson for the group and come up and then discuss why they believe their strategy is correct. And then if it was a good rationale, they would reward that, and that person would go sit down. And then the other student from another group would come up, and they would discuss why they think their strategy was correct. And that if they did a good job of describing their thinking, the teacher would reward that, and then they could go. Then the class would then start to ask questions of both of the 2 representatives about their strategies, so that they could get at why 2 different strategies could come to the same answer, or why 2 strategies that look very similar could come to different answers, and then if so, which one was correct, and how do we know if it's correct? And so they took the language that the students gave them, the strategies that they revealed, the pictures that they drew, and used that as a public display of what's important in mathematics, this reasoning abstractly and quantitatively, the intending to precision, the mathematical modeling, and the arguments that students create, and then use that as the basis for how they would determine what the appropriate strategies were, what the reasoning was behind it, and what the skills were that students could put in their pocket and use later on. That was a very, very good question. That was a very good question. That's one of the things that I have seen. Okay. There are many other language practices, and I've given a couple of references to the organizers so that they will put that up on the blog afterwards, so that you'll be able to go and see obviously more detail than we can do in 40 minutes here. Okay. We're going to go back to competence here. Right here. Okay. So there's another question, which is with English learners, this issue of competence can be really hard, and I agree entirely. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking about it. If I knew everything about it, it would be, I'd make a lot more money than I do right now. So the question is, how would you suggest that we increase competence for students with varied language backgrounds? Well, I think one of the things you have to have this balance between challenge and control. So for something to become interesting, if you take a look at this flow chart, up here in this dotted box, we have an opportunity to engage in a mathematical task. So let's say it's some sort of task on adding fractions with unlike denominators. You're taking two different quantities, and one of them is fifths and one of them is twelfths, and you're trying to figure out how much you actually have. Very difficult typically for your 4th, 5th, 6th grade children. Well, those are very challenging kinds of tasks, but how do we then give kids control over that challenge? So that the challenge is right kind of in their zone of proximal development from a kind of a Vygotskian idea. Well, there's several ways. One is we can give them free choice. Okay, we can give them free choice of activities to where we have 5 or 6 different levels of challenge, and the students can choose the appropriate level of challenge for themselves, solve that problem maybe with a little help, and then move to the next level higher, so that they can help modulate the appropriate level of challenge. Another way we can develop control, and this is critical for ELL populations, in particular when there's total when they're immersed entirely in a English-only class, is to provide appropriate tools for communication. So notice that these mathematical practices that we talked about had nothing to do with English language. Even constructing mathematical arguments isn't about necessarily the words that you say, but it's a combination of words and drawings and data tables and symbols on paper, and perhaps even acting things out kinesthetically. That it's that combination of representational forms that allows us to understand really what's going on in your mind. And so to provide tools that allow students to represent the mathematics in multiple ways will give them more control, A, over how they understand the mathematics to begin with, and B, how they display their understanding for this public this public discussion that they may have in their mathematics classroom. So so providing appropriate tools, providing free choice of activities, and mentorship, of course. Now the teacher and other students have a role in providing control and challenge, so that students can do two things, and teachers and students, the others in the classroom. Number one, they can challenge people to harder tasks. Students can write tasks and challenge each other, and that's a wonderful activity that if we have time I can go into later. And then second, they can help mediate between where a student is currently and the next level of understanding. They can show them strategies. They can challenge them with another task that forces the student to re-examine what they think about, let's say, fractions with unlike denominators. The idea that 3/5 and 2/12 is not 7/17. That's a common misconception for, say, 4th graders. How do you get them to understand that these denominators are different sized pieces in a fraction? All right, so drawing a picture might be a way of giving them control. So that's a good question. So if you can do those things, that challenge becomes potentially interesting, because it's not so challenging that it's frustrating, and it's not so mental pablum that it's boring, and so they'll put appropriate effort to learn something that they have a kind of a situational interest in. If they have an interest in something, they'll also then start to develop learning goals around that. Not just goals, I want to get an A. That's not a learning goal. That's a performance goal. A learning goal is something, I want to understand this new way of thinking about quantities that we're calling fractions. And then they'll put effort towards that specific learning goal. And the combination of interest and learning goals will, of course, lead to more effort and then more achievement. Over here on the right side, of course, the usefulness. Now, situating mathematics in important contexts. Having a pizza party is a great context. understanding how people package eggs, understanding the ways in which soda is packaged, looking at the way in which we look at batting averages, understanding the growth rates of whales. All of those things can be thought of as good contexts for understanding fractions with unlike denominators. And so if a student has an interest in one of those activities, one of those topics, excuse me, then the usefulness of that will lead to the mathematics will lead to greater interest in the mathematical task, and lead to more learning goals, more effort, and more achievement. So through a combination of challenge, appropriate control, the development of interest and the exploitment of interest, and the usefulness of the mathematics in which you situate the task will lead students to a greater expenditure of effort, both of course cognitively, linguistically, and then lead to greater achievement. Let me move my screen back here so I can, there we go. They're telling me I'm halfway there and we're only a third of the way through. That's okay. Effort is really important. So remember, the effort is kind of the linchpin here. Nothing challenging can be accomplished without effort. And if students are putting in a small amount of effort, then something is not right in the mathematical classroom. Of course, you'll have differential efforts. Some things will be more challenging for some students, and some students will have more control because they have prior knowledge or some mathematical predilection towards graphical analysis, those kinds of things. So there'll be different ability levels for different problems, and so people will have put in differential effort. The idea is, though, if you increase your effort, you will increase your probability of success, and you will increase your achievement overall. And so how we get students to put forth an appropriate amount of effort, without only doing mathematics all the time, becomes a key set of strategies, which we'll get to in just a little bit. So autonomy. What we're asking really here is for this idea of positive interdependence, that a student develops autonomy, mathematical autonomy, competence, skills, confidence, okay, in such a way that they can work with others in their learning process. So it's not separating them from others, but autonomy is something where it gives you a unique role in a learning group. It gives you contribution, an important contribution in the classroom. And so the kinds of experiences that increase students' opportunities for autonomy are listed right here on this page. We want experiences that contribute to their understanding of their efficacy. In what kinds of activities do I really seem to be effective? Okay. Can I understand that? If I'm not so good in mathematics, I'll have to put some effort here. If I don't understand geometry, but I'm better at algebra, I need to put some more effort into the algebra. So it has to be in relation to the content. Experiences also that contribute to the development of an identity relative to mathematics. This becomes critical with our English language learners in particular, because often the majority culture will negate the contributions of a language learner because perhaps the sophistication of the language has not been developed yet, even though the underlying thought may be quite sophisticated. And so to develop an identity relative to mathematics, I am able to do mathematics and I'm able to work with others in mathematics. We need to get students to be able to then, again, share their strategies and to reward the effective communication of strategies, not the linguistic or not the English language word communication, but the overall communication using a variety of representational forms. Also, you can't get a good identity in mathematics if you don't do challenging tasks. So you see these all contribute to each other. And then lastly, experiences about careers and developing career goals. Again, that utility, that future, who do you want to be in the future? What kind of occupation do you want to be engaged in? How does that utilize mathematics? What kind of mathematics do you want to be engaged in? How is mathematics changing in that field? Those are questions that need to be addressed so that students can see what they're doing now has real impact on who they want to be. Let's see, what's the next question here? Oh, there's a big one. This is a long question, so I'll look at it through, so I'll maybe silent for a little bit. So have a sip of coffee. Okay, so this question has to do in particular with lots of large influx of students from Central America. Of course, in Phoenix, we're aside from Los Angeles, we have the largest concentration of Central American students, I believe, in the United States. And so this is a big question that we have right around here. And so the idea of is how do we make mathematical problems and tasks more concrete and approachable for students? What are some tasks that can help these newcomer students who come here without a lot of English language facility, although plenty of Spanish language facility typically, or from in Guatemala from a Mayan language facility, and perhaps Spanish is their second language, particularly for formative assessment and building competence. So one of the things that becomes really important is to understand, what do people do in their lives? It's kind of a truism in cognitive psychology that we don't actually learn new things in the sense that we learn things that are entirely new. What we do is we take new information and we attach it to old structures in our minds. So we have these, let's say, frameworks that we've created about the way in which the moon moves, or about the way in which we go to the theater and what we pay for, how much things are worth, those kinds of things. And we found that that children often that are working in these very poor areas have a pretty good understanding of informally of mathematics, because they've had to work many times in the market, or had to help their family by selling gum or selling other objects on the street, and so they're able to count in meaningful ways using local currency. Or in fact, in Brazil, the Brazilian street children, they developed very elaborate mathematics informally around 12s, the base 12, because they sold eggs in dozens. And so they could count by 12s very quickly when counting by 10s was very foreign to them. And of course, developing that is, understanding that allows you then to help to take advantage of what the children bring to you, the context that they bring to you from Guatemala, or from El Salvador, or from Ecuador, or from Mexico, or from wherever students come from Phoenix, the different communities. Take the context that they're familiar with, and then you can develop mathematical tasks around them. And so the students that have this base 12 understanding, you could use this and say, look how amazing this is, and actually make that a strength in the classroom to where these students have mathematical cachet in the eyes of their peers. This is a very terse response to the question, because it's such an important and difficult question. But understanding your students, the more you know about your students and what they bring with you socially, community-wise, economically, and obviously from their academic background, the better you're able to tailor tasks to the particular challenge level of those students, and also to be able to get those students to show that they are sophisticated thinkers, and that with some support, some supports like communication tools, a friend who is bilingual to translate, those kind of things, can reveal what they know and be an active part of the classroom, as legitimate as anyone else. Let me try that. Now we come back here. All right. So the last step we talk about is mindset, and so there's basically two kinds of mindsets that people have. Most of us believe either that intelligence is fixed, or that intelligence can be significantly changed through effort. Okay? Carol Dweck, if you look up at the top here, Carol Dweck, if you look at her book called Mindset, it's a brilliant book that can give you really good strategies on how to help people, both academically and socially, to gain in their motivation and their appreciation for subject matter. So these two kinds of people, you can basically have these two statements in bold. The fixed mindset says that you can learn new things, but you really can't change your basic level of talent. This is the idea of the math gene concept. And by the way, this is the most prevalent mindset in America right now. Our very language says, oh, she's quick. Man, she's fast. That was great. She got it so quickly. Or, and boy, I was never good at math. My dad was never good at math. Some people are just, they're just good at math. These are things that we see in the news, and it's fostered through our language. We need to change our language to something like this. No matter how much intelligence you have, you can always get smarter through effort. Or no matter how poor you seem to be at mathematics right now, you can always significantly get better through the effort that you put forth. You notice that you can do something here, you can't do anything here. So this is the key to education. If we don't have this mindset in education, then, well, there's nothing we can do really. Now, so if you look at about these basic beliefs, you can see that they're quite different, and that this growth mindset is much more positive educationally than the fixed mindset. Of course, we all kind of have some beliefs that cross both areas, but we want to move students to a predominantly growth mindset. Because you'll notice that a growth mindset, people tend to develop learning goals where success is defined by improvement of knowledge and skills. That non-successes, what some people call failures. I don't like to call them failures because often being unsuccessful is a key to becoming more successful in the future by analyzing the results of our failures. So that feedback that we talked about earlier, the informational aspect of feedback is really critical here. Okay, so people who have this growth mindset, I may not be so smart in it now, but if I work hard, I can be successful. Have these kinds of learning goals. People that believe that intelligence is fixed and can't be changed tend to, of course, have these kinds of goals, which, if you look at them, are not particularly healthy overall. And so to help students change their mindset, they need to understand that they have a mindset and that they can change it. To verbalize what is your efficacy on this task? Do you believe you can do it? Can you do it? In mathematics in general, what's your efficacy? How do I get better in mathematics? And I always tell the students, I say effort wins, effort wins, effort wins. They get sick of it, but they start saying it themselves. This becomes really an important mantra for our students. And let's see here. Time, we're doing okay. Almost done. And lastly here, I want you to think about positive causal attributions, that if I'm successful in something, I have some ability, but hard work is what really got me there. And if I fail, it's probably because I didn't work hard enough, or there may be some random external factor, who knows what happened. A family member passed away. Yeah, that's okay. You can do poorly on a test if some family member passes away, but because that's not attributable to your innate ability. Later on, I can say, okay, I'm gonna get that. I'm gonna work hard to get that out of my system now, and now I can go back to the test and be successful. And so you can see all of these things tie together. Okay, they tie together. A sense of belonging allows you to feel a positive interdependence, have autonomy within being part of a group. It allows you then to develop competence in mathematical tasks and mathematical pursuits and mathematical ways of thinking. The mindset, how you believe intelligence is augmented, changes how you think about what it means to be competent, gives you more autonomy, and then of course those tie together. This is one big set of understandings that people have about themselves in relation to mathematics and in relation to others. So these are the big ideas. Kind of backwards the way I presented them. Change your mind. Change your mind. Listen to your heart. Okay. Interest and intrinsic motivation. And remember that this is about challenge. What are your challenges? How are you going to challenge yourself? How useful is this knowledge for what you love to do? And of course, help others. Help others. So belonging, challenge, autonomy. Where's autonomy? okay, and mindset. So I did get it down to 3. And of course, I'm going to give you a shameless plug on motivation. This is a book that I put out actually in 2011. It's a review of about the last 30 years of research in motivation in mathematics. We start every chapter with a real story of a teacher or a child involved with some mathematical dilemma and that relates to their motivation to illustrate all of the important facets of research over these that we found over these 30 years. And then we provide a set of strategies that teachers can use effectively in their classrooms, complete with those vignettes. So this is written as a comprehensive review of the research, but it's written in such a way as to try to be helpful and applicable for teachers. All right, so we've got a couple more questions here. And so now we're, fire away with the questions. I think we're at the question period. So I'm going to start with one. Question. I'm all in favor of trying to promote intrinsic reward, but there seems to be plenty of data about how kids learn better when there is some sort of prize at stake, even if silly and cheap. What do we do? That's a fantastic question, and of course you're correct. There is lots of data about how kids learn better. The issue is how we define learning and how we define better. So if you give reward to a student for a particular behavior, they will do that behavior and tend to learn that material to get that reward. And as long as you continue to place those rewards in front of the students and they consistently get the reward for the behavior, they'll continue to work towards that. Once, however, the rewards are removed from the situation, it becomes very difficult. The students start to resent it and they start to dislike the activity because they feel they've been tricked into it. So this is there's a book called The Hidden Costs of Reward that show that if you are going to use rewards, then you need to do 2 things. One, make it so that a student gets a reward when it's unexpected. So a student does something well, and you toss them a little candy bar, right? Or the gold star or whatever the reward system is that you have. The student did not expect the reward, and so the reward provides the reward value. Obviously, it's good to be recognized and good to have that treat, but also it gives them informational value about what they did that was important. So again, always tie this information. What is the reward rewarding? Not just being correct. It should reward deep revelation of the student's thinking process, so that other people can take that thinking process and use it for themselves. Also, you need to understand that and also if the reward is not expected, then the student doesn't feel resentful the next time that they don't get a reward for doing the same kind of behavior. They know the teachers, it's not something that's expected. It's just a marker of good thinking periodically. So I think that's a reasonable thing. And of course, the other thing that makes it tricky is that everything a student does has some reward or punishment attached to it, right? Students don't go to mathematics because they want to, typically. It's not all intrinsic. So there's a combination of intrinsic motivation, the interests and the usefulness, the challenge and control that students are negotiating anytime they work in a mathematical task. And then there's also the fear of sanction or fear of poor grades, and the desire to look good versus others, and the desire to get recognition from the teacher. The student is negotiating all of those things, and so you need to emphasize the intrinsic, right? De-emphasize the extrinsic, the rewards and punishments, but understand that they're there so that you can put them in their proper place. That's why you have to have a teacher. If we knew all about this and we could do this automatically, then the teacher would be superfluous, and we know from 30, 40 years of research that it's just too complex. We can't program that. That teacher has to be able to go in and be artistic in their application of these ideas. So next question is, can you recommend any math games that increase motivation but are also anchored in the CCSS mathematical practices? Yeah, actually, I think there's a really good one. Now, it depends on, of course, what grade you teach. If you have an iOS phone, or if you have iPods or iPads, there is a lovely mathematics game. It's called Motion Math. Okay, Motion Math. It costs 99 cents for for one of those for Motion Math on those machines, and it is actually brilliant for teaching fractions, the order of fractions, how to connect fractional notation to the actual relative size of pieces, parts to a whole, and to both improper fraction notation, standard fraction notation, mixed numbers, and decimals. That is really simple, and what's nice about it is the student does what they do, and it's the challenge. You start just by moving a ball on the screen, and it tailors itself to the ability of the student, so they get this optimal level of challenge. The control is tied to the student just moving their iOS device in their hands. It's a really lovely game. There are many other kinds of games that you could have students play. What's my number type games where students choose a number and the other student has to work in intervals of tens and ones to get close to that number, so they get used to decomposing numbers into hundreds, tens, ones, and then adding the tens first, and then the hundreds, adding the larger denominations first, and then down to the lower denominations. So guess my number type games are wonderful. Particularly, they develop a sense of belonging. You can also have one of the things that I've done in classes is many of my children that I've worked with from Central America and Mexico have very different types of calculational procedures that they use, correct ones, than students than my English-speaking students. And so I have them teach those different calculational routines to my English-speaking students and vice versa. And then the idea is now why do they both work? They look very different, but why do they both work? And I think that's a really nice quote-unquote game that you can play if you have that condition in your classroom. Again, that's also tutors. The next question is, in thinking about this idea of learning goals, there is also a connection back to the need to follow standards. Could you talk about the relationship between learning goals and teaching standards, excuse me. Yeah, so the idea is ultimately we would like students' learning goals to be identical to our teaching standards. Well, that's very unrealistic. On the other hand, students should be able to construct a statement for themselves about what is important about the mathematics, number one. Number two, what they should get out of a mathematics task or a mathematics lesson, number two. And number three, how that might be useful in the future. In doing so, the students will know how to determine whether or not they've functionally achieved, the objective of the lesson. And this should not be stated in the teacher's terms, but in the student's terms, so that it becomes internalized by the students. Because the teacher, you or I as a teacher could set goals, and then often we have to post them on our boards. It's required for many teachers to post those quote-unquote goals and objectives. Well, those aren't the students' goals and objectives. And so having the students at the beginning of a lesson say, what are my goals? What do I want to learn? How will I know if I've learned it? How will I be able to use it in the future? And actually use that as an assessment, so that they state that at the beginning, and then at the end state how they've come to, whether they've realized those goals, and then what they need to do to be able to realize those goals. And then you can tailor instruction to help them, so that their learning goals are met. And also, you have to help. This is not something that's just done. You have to help model and work with them so that they can create appropriate learning goals at appropriate level of challenge. The next question is, mathematical reasoning and argumentation practices are key with the Common Core and can also be really tough for English learners. What would you recommend? This is really hard. You guys are giving me great questions. Well, my biggest recommendation is to understand that in mathematics, mathematical argumentation and reasoning are not English. Okay, they're mathematical. It turns out that the English language is a very useful language for argumentation and for revealing reasoning practices. But Spanish or Mandarin or Tagalog or other languages are also good for mathematical argumentation and reasoning. The difficulty comes when I, as the teacher, don't understand what my student is saying, or where large groups of students in the classroom don't understand what other groups of students are saying. And so this, that's the real dilemma when we're talking about Common Core mathematical argumentation and ELLs in the classroom. So the key in this, the key as I see it, and it's certainly not as simple as I'll present, but again, I've given some references so you can take a look at how this has been accomplished in some other research that deals directly with ELLs in the classroom. The key there is to broaden your perspective from words and the traditional notion of language to a broader perspective on communication, which would include all of the other representational forms connected to each other, graphs, pictures, pictorial representations, tables and charts that show regularities and patterns, of course symbols, the mathematical symbols that are not universal. They're pretty close, but they're not entirely universal around the world, so you have to be careful how you utilize mathematical symbols. And of course, acting things out, kinesthetics, those kind of things. You take these representations, then the emphasis is on communication and argumentation, not on language facility per se. And then you can get, with all students in a classroom, armed with these kinds of tools, you can get at at mathematical argumentation and communication with with everybody, and so that they develop the challenge, the important mathematical skills, the mathematical practices, the belongingness, and the efficacy in the students all at once. And so now Sarah is telling me they're ready to transition to the next phase.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for your time and your expertise today and all of your recommendations. And we're so excited that our participants were actively involved, and we very much appreciate the questions. And clearly, this illustrates that you've shared a great deal of valuable information that we can take back to our classrooms. And that teachers can take to their students, and that those who may be administrators may be taking to students. And so we'll sort of transition back to thinking about let's take some of this theory and guidance and put it into practice. Our team will be posting webinar-related resources within Education Connections in the coming weeks. We will follow up on some of the highlights that Jim mentioned in terms of his previous work and the work of others. And a video archive of the webinar will be posted in about 1 week. A PDF of the PowerPoint and other resources may be posted sooner if that's possible for our team. We'll do our best. Just click on webinars after you log into Education Connections to find these materials. And you can also view webinars conducted in previous months in that space. We would like to also highlight and invite you once again to join the Education Connections Lesson Plan Competition. You can find information regarding the competition by clicking on the Lesson Planning tab within the Education Connections site. We host monthly competitions, and each month announce a winner who will receive a $100 stipend in the form of a gift card. So this is an exciting opportunity for us to contribute to teachers as they go forth and implement instruction. And so overall, we just want to say thank you for joining us today, for your time and participating in today's webinar and session. We invite you to join Education Connections at the link on your screen if you haven't already or are not already a member. And there you'll find a range of valuable information in terms of the activities with which we're involved. These include professional learning communities for interacting with peers, resources about standards-based instruction for English learner and emergent bilingual students. Webinars are archived including this one, those from the past, and we'll be conducting webinars roughly every 8 weeks. Lesson planning resources, and again, the opportunity to compete to win a $100 stipend. We welcome you to contact Education Connections at edconnect@cal.org with questions or comments, or if you'd like to collaborate with us further. And with that, we would again like to deeply thank Dr. Jim Middleton for joining us today and sharing your expertise, guidance, and recommendations. And we will end our session. Thank you so much, everyone. We look forward to connecting with you via the site and as well in our next webinar presentation. Take care, everyone.